Hello and happy 2019. This is DDK and it's time to talk some esports. I hope you guys had an amazing break. Of course, you've had the holidays, time to reflect, time to re-strategize as we move into the new year. Now, I'm not much for resolutions, so this is somewhat of a coincidence. I would not call it a New Year's resolution, but this is definitely me now looking to kick things off after the break with a new approach. And that approach is to bring consistency and frequency when it comes to the release of the podcast, because I know that's a really, really big deal for improving it for yourself as listeners, and also for myself as the producer of the content. And I really want to make this successful and to grow. And I'm very committed to that 100 episode milestone. And one of the things I want to be doing is more episodes like this, where it's just me talking about some of the news within the scene or other things that people are thinking about in the scene that are interesting. And that is going to help me if there is really a spot where I just can't get a guest that week, because that happens. And, we have scheduling issues. Everyone's very busy. So this is going to be there to make sure that you guys have some content to at least chew on in between episodes where I can get a guest in. So without further ado, let's get into today's topics. I want to be discussing, as it is the new year after all, the new roster changes that we have had to move into the year with, because we have every reason to imagine that these rosters will stick together for a good, hopefully, few months. I know that in Counter-Strike, it can be that the rosters don't stay together for too long, especially when compared with conventional sports. So let's start with MIBR. I think that's very interesting. And, if you guys are MIBR fans and you haven't seen Yanko's interview on HLTV, I'd certainly recommend you guys checking that one out, as he did talk a lot about coaching MIBR, his experience doing so, and some of the issues that they will have had or will have in the future, and how he felt things went. And I think it's really interesting, because one of the points that he made is that communication, whilst that can be seen as an issue, it's hard to say whether or not that's really enough of an issue to warrant it requiring a full Brazilian lineup. Or is it a cop-out or an excuse? Or is it just a bit of nostalgia because back in 2017, the team was winning with a full Brazilian roster, all of these tournaments, and doing so very well. And so I agree with him. I think that it's really important to make that difference, or to try to highlight that difference, that sure, this is something that could be an issue, but it probably isn't the crux of what you look, the issues of that will really make a big difference in improving the performance of the team. So what they've done is they've brought in Zeus and they've brought in Taco. And I actually do think that these are amazing pickups, whether or not, nostalgia is an issue or not. These are amazing pickups. You've got Zeus, who used to be with Luminosity, which, of course, was fallen and very much helped with their success and sending them on a trajectory that would be very, very scary indeed, becoming the most dominant team and having an era of dominance. And you got Taco, who has been working with Zeus very closely on Team Liquid, and they've had this long journey. And then Taco, wasn't there for as long as Zeus was, but Zeus has had this long journey, bringing up all this new talent and making them very consistent in a period where a lot of teams have been struggling. And so Zeus has not only the ability to speak Brazilian, rather Portuguese, I always do that, Portuguese, and communicate in the native tongues of MIBR, but he also has their respect. He's worked with them before. He knows how they are, how their temperaments are. Taco's same for him. He's worked with all these players before as well. He's a support player that has shown to be incredibly critical, despite when he was cut from the team. It was due to the fact that people were like, well, this guy's not fragging, and obviously it was a very one-dimensional way to look at the game. And we've seen how important these kinds of players are. And I think another great example of this was when we saw Stika removed from mousesports. This is another situation where people are like, oh, this guy is not doing well enough, he's not fragging enough, so therefore he's not worthy on the team. That's completely incorrect. Another team that can really embody one of these principles is Astralis. We've seen no shortage of people looking at Astralis and saying, well, you know what? Astralis individually, they don't have the best firepower. Well, if that's the case, then we really shouldn't be looking at that as a metric when we're looking at what makes the most successful team, or what are the components you need to bring together to make a very successful team. So this is a very important turn of events, I would say, from that sense. And Taco's proved himself many times, and his evolution as a player from the days in which he was from the Brazilian team and then making his way onto Team Liquid and his growth within that team. It's going to be very interesting to see how he inserts back into Made in Brazil. So it's really interesting, I think, now, because we've seen that Fallen has brought his past form back into the game. And if you have now Zeus, who's got a very he has a very good understanding. If you didn't listen to the podcast I did with him, it's definitely one of the best ones we've recorded so far. He understands sort of the psychology elements and how to create a culture in a team. And he's obviously had Team Liquid, the 2 years with Team Liquid, and growing those players as a very positive and a great success when it comes to applying those methodologies to a team. So Zeus is going to be able to help to fix the culture of MIBR to make them overall stronger. I would also imagine that, and I'm hoping that Zeus has enough authority that he's going to be able to hopefully fix some of the issues that Yanku was saying is a problem with a lot of these top teams. We just don't have at the moment the coaching staff in a position where they have enough power. That is a very big problem. The power needs to go into the hands of the coaches, like much more power at least, and they need to be able to find ways to support their team. And Zeus may say, he may be like, guys, you got to hire a sports psychologist, you got to hire a sports performance expert, you got to look into these different ways to support the team outside of the game and to really have a big impact on their overall performance inside of the game. The two things are very important. You can't just focus on the in-game. It's a mistake to do so. And this is a really important idea. I mean, when I was at the ECS finals in Texas, I was talking to Valde on the couch when we were watching some games about the difference between personality and chemistry when it comes to a team, a top-level team, because the two things are different. And you can have a team which has very good chemistry, but it might not gel together all that well when it comes to playing in the in-game interactions. And both things are important. Like, you want to have a team where outside of the game, they can bond together, they can share hobbies together, they can go to the gym together, whenever they come together outside of the game, it's going to be a positive experience because that's going to reflect on how the interactions will be in the game, and it's going to reflect how well they can help each other, how well they can support each other through losses, through wins, and all of that, obviously. But the balance of personalities within the match is very important, and it is something altogether different because some people are more quiet and some people are sort of more intense. And if you have only quiet people, well, then a huge breakdown in communication can occur that is not great for anyone, really. So that's something you have to be very, very wary of. And I think, we were talking about this within the context of NRG, a team which they have great chemistry. Daps has told me that the team, they get along really, really well, and that's something that they really love about the team. But there may be an issue when it comes to the mixture of personalities. Maybe they do have too much of a communication issue because people begin to get a bit quiet. And Valde used Astralis as a really good example of a great balance of personalities where you have the right intensity in a player like Dupree, and he may have really big highs and he'll hype up the team, but maybe he has moments when he gets a little bit too negative, it's kind of part of it. And then you got somebody who's just ice cold, like Zipex, or you got somebody like Device who can kind of blend in very easily, be very, very calm, but there are moments when he can choose to be a little bit more loud. And you got Glaive, who's very intense as the leader, and so on and so forth. Like, there's a very good balance when it comes to Astralis, and so it's just another way in which they just work as a unit. It doesn't matter that they lack, maybe one of the players lacks some ADR or something, or some individual skill when it compared with the Faze players, because as a team, as a unit, they are very successful. So this is something that I think is going to be really interesting when we look at MIBR moving forwards. Will it be that the lessons taken from this experience, moving to MIBR and having the struggles, and then now getting Zeus and Taco back, that they'll have the right pieces to move forward and be successful? I think absolutely it is the case. They're going to be very dangerous moving into this year, into 2019. I think they're going to have a renewed motivation. They get to have their nostalgia, but they also get to have a coach that they know who's considered likely to be the best coach behind Zonic. I think Zeus and Zonic are the two coaches that really have the most renown in the scene and the most and are considered to have the most quality in the scene. Those are the two people that people will think of off the top of their heads. And no wonder both Liquid and Astralis have been the most successful teams, kind of ushering in this new era of a more professional approach. And the coaching is very much very much to do with that. So that makes a lot of sense. So I'm very excited for their how they'll develop, and I hope that they're ready for the major coming up. Faze, this is a really interesting one. So I think Faze, they flirted with the idea of getting Yanko previously before he joined MIBR, but I don't think it ever quite worked out. And then obviously Robin recently is stepping down, having a kid. He's going to have a new role, which is yet to be announced, I think, for Faze. But he's got a lot of stuff going on in his personal life that he can't quite dedicate the same amount of time to going to all these tournaments. So you need somebody who doesn't have as many of those restraints, that can be there with the players more often. And Yanko and Nico, we know this is a very good combination. Nico, who took up some of the leadership roles in Karrigan's absence from the team, and when they knew he was sort of on the way out, he was starting to take more leadership roles on the team as well. And Nico in the past, he led Mouse Sports, and when they weren't doing very well, and it feels like Nico has the ability to do the role and still be a fragger. But I do wonder if something will shift now that Yanko will be there helping. So I'm very curious how that dynamic will change in the team with Nico in-game leading. Will there be more pressure, alleviated by having Yanko there now, who can communicate with him? They're going to be two people that really see eye to eye. They have a huge amount of respect for each other. They've played together in the past. Both comrades. Being from the same region, so it's they have culturally, they're going to see eye to eye as well, which is a very important factor when it comes to understanding one another. Because when we're talking about these dynamics in a team, culture is critical. It's one of the reasons why when you say, oh, we need an all Brazilian team, it might not necessarily be a communication issue insofar as a language issue is concerned, but it may actually be a cultural issue instead, where you're looking at how a team, or how personalities mesh together just by nature of the fact that they're from the same culture. That we that's a huge thing. So that we can see has been beneficial to some teams that have been able to stay together, who are from the same culture. Astralis is one of those. I think that's actually really the best argument for having players all from one region is actually the cultural advantage, not necessarily the language advantage. So it allows the team to communicate better, to understand each other better, to flow better. And I think that's something that's going to be pretty beneficial in an otherwise international lineup. If you have the two authority figures seeing eye to eye, you at least have the leadership in a position where they're going to be able to lead together and not have really any arguments or any issues really working with one another. It's going to be a pretty strong leadership moving into Faze. And I think that's something that they've needed for a long time. And I think that's something that started to wane, especially as the results started to die down. And after, Karrigan's initial success with the team started to be something that, it started to lose some steam. And I think the addition of Adren as a replacement is really an interesting one, because if we look at how the dynamics of the team change, Karrigan is not a bad player at all by any stretch of the imagination when it comes to the individual performance. Obviously, he's dwarfed when it comes to the lineup of Faze, but obviously his role was to coordinate them, to organize them, to call the strategies, to get into the other IGL's head and to understand the way the meta's moving, to be able to make the best calls possible and letting the firepower he has do the job for him. And if you look at the addition of Adren, he's probably one of the best and most experienced players that there has ever been from the CIS region. And so I think that level of experience and how cool-headed Adren is, it's going to be really interesting seeing how that extra firepower is going to lend itself to Faze. Because for me, when I look at Adren, I see a player that is incredible when it comes to clutches. He's incredible at mid-round, late round scenarios. He's very good at anchoring bomb sites on the CT side. There's really not a lot that he's not amazing at, and he's able to deliver under pressure and on the big stage. So they're getting more firepower. So this to me signals that they need that strong leadership. They need for Yanko to be able to help with Nico together to instill a new culture into the team. Because one thing that has fallen to them is criticism on some of the, the work ethic, I think, in some of the past on some of the players, just because they're so individually good that it seems as though at points they focus on that a bit too much, as opposed to wanting to develop themselves as a highly tactical team, and a team that can meet the tactics and strategies of a team like Astralis. And if in theory, if a team like FaZe is able to accomplish that, then obviously why should they be held back? Why should they not be in a position to consistently beat a team like Astralis? Then it just surely comes down to psychology and having crazy. That's the point in which the Counter-Strike gets incredible, because you get to a point where the two teams are so incredible that they both have to take big risks consistently against one another, because otherwise, if they do anything that's too easily readable, the other team will be able to deal with that. So it creates this high-risk gameplay that can be really interesting to watch. And then as a rivalry formulates, then you get the two teams knowing each other better and better. The mind games get really crazy, and it becomes this, what we tend to classify as like this domestic matchup factor, where each other so well. What you're doing is you're creating a meta within specifically that matchup, and that's just amazing to watch. And I feel like FaZe should be one of those teams that are capable in 2019 of being a challenger to Astralis and their consistency, but it only can come from a renewed culture within the team and a more innovative and a new tactical approach where the work ethic is there. And I think Yanko is a good guy to help to lead that. And I think Nika is a guy that's going to help to instill that. So looking really good, I think, for FaZe moving forwards. I think it's going to be really fun to watch them. And along with MIBR, they're absolutely one of the teams to watch to see if they can dethrone Astralis and the era that they've now cemented for themselves. Thirdly, I wanted to talk a little bit about Liquid, and obviously they've lost Taco, they've lost Zeus, really huge losses. You've lost an incredible support player, which actually at this level of play seems to be like gold, because there's not a huge amount of incredibly gifted support players who are willing to sacrifice themselves for their teammates in the game and to set up their teammates, but also have the right chemistry, like personality, as well as experience, and as well as like the clutch factor and individual ability. Because if they have all those things to the super top level, you may expect them to actually, maybe they want to lean towards a star player role, but that's kind of the, where we're at the moment. You need a guy like a Zipex, who's just ridiculously consistent, very, very smart, very reliable, always there to set up his teammates, but in of himself is an absolute beast in any other situation as well, and very clutch. Like that's what you really want if you're going to be a top 3 team. And all these brands, Liquid, FaZe, MIBR, these are teams which they can only really see a successful year if they've won a lot of tournaments, if they've beaten the number 1 team many times. If they can't beat them consistently, they at least are able to take finals away from them every so often. Like that's the level that these teams are trying to achieve. And so in removing Taco, we've got Stewie put in. So Stewie is interesting in that way, because on MIBR, he's already been sort of pushed out of perhaps, in some respects, some of his comfort zones that he found on Cloud9. Because on Cloud9, when they had the successful run at the major, you really had a team which they didn't have an enormous amount of depth, but the thing is that they had mastery, a serious degree of mastery over the style in which they were playing. Like, you had all of those players at that time, they were in roles that fit them really well. They had great chemistry. The personalities on the team meshed well enough that obviously they were able to win a major, and that was very comfortable for everybody. And then obviously they had some hardships here or there, though. Previous to that, obviously there was a reason why they decided to split up. But then Stewie has had this long period now where he's not really been experiencing some of the success that he had in the past, and he's had to reinvent himself in certain ways in moving forwards to try to fit into that MIBR lineup. But now he's coming back to a completely new team where he's replacing a support player. So that's a really interesting question mark to think about. How Stewie's going to mesh into the team and how the roles will change around. And it's hard to say really how that's going to develop. So I'm looking forward to seeing their games. One of the other factors to talk about with them, of course, will be the fact that you've got Adren as, coming in as a leader. Now, we know Adren to be, one of the staple content producers in North America when it comes to providing some deeper analytical videos, as well as some really good instructional stuff for some of the newer players, and so he very much is a teacher and has an amazing mind for Counter-Strike. However, the criticism that I have is that I feel like Adren is perfect, absolutely perfect in an analyst role, but I'm not so sure about being in the coaching role. And I think that this is very much trial by fire for him, because as we mentioned previously, some of the, one of the reasons why people like, Zeus, why Zeus could be considered a superstar in of his own right is because the skill sets for coaching go so much beyond understanding the game. That's an enormous plus, understanding it to a very, very top level. But you also need to be able to manage your players. You need to be able to manage their performance as a team and individually. And you need to guide that. And that requires a lot of self-awareness. That requires a lot of social intelligence, understanding the ways that the players communicate between each other and the ways that you need to communicate to each player specifically to get the best out of them. And then also trying to do some of the business side of things where you're trying to fight for your team to get the things that they need from the organization that you're representing to make sure that they have the best chance at tournaments, to give them maybe the breaks that they need, to give them the support that they need, whether that's to try to hire somebody to, as we mentioned before, to focus on the sports psychology or other performance elements. There's a lot that goes into it that is not just at being an analyst in the game, and that's something we know Adren's very good at. And he himself has said this is something that he's considered trying to get into, but it wasn't until the offer came around that he was like, oh, okay, actually, this is actually perfect timing because I really was thinking about this, but obviously he doesn't have experience doing it in the past. So really interesting challenge for him. I would love for Liquid to be able to bring somebody else on to maybe help him or fill out some of the gaps, because the other thing is that Zeus was very good at integrating players into the system that he'd created. Obviously, it's him creating it has some advantage. And so, not having him there and to have sort of Stewie moved into the team, it kind of suggests to me that Team Liquid needs to like massively reinvent themselves, and they may have a string of very inconsistent results for the next like month or two, whilst they really try to shuffle things around and figure it out. And it may be a little bit messy. That's one of the realities of it. That wouldn't surprise me if it was messy. I would be surprised if everything just clicks straight away. In MIBR's case, if everything clicks straight away, I wouldn't be surprised. And similarly with Faze, if everything clicks straight away, I also wouldn't be surprised. And it's just because of the styles of how the teams have played in the past. And, with the Faze, they've always been able to play kind of loose, to kind of leverage that individual ability, to not have to be too constrained by some of the tactical and strategical nuance as much as some other teams. So that's going to be easier for Adren to fit into as a player. Whereas for Liquid, I think they're going to have to shuffle things and it's going to be a bit messy. So we'll see how it all turns out. But I think that about does it here for today's musings on the recent news of the roster changes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this chat, and remember to like, subscribe, and all that goodness. Spread the word if you think other people might be interested in listening to the podcast. And for the following week, I will be endeavoring to get a guest on, but if I don't, there'll be another release regardless. Thank you very much.